My name's Patrick. I'm an alcoholic. Okay, I'm going to share now. It's an honor to lead this meeting. Thank you, Tony, for asking me to do it. I want to apologize to the meeting because I blew off my literature commitment the last 2 weeks, which is bullshit, and there's no excuse for it. I thought Tony was texting me to fire me from literature, and he actually asked me to lead the meeting tonight. So typical AA compassion, just keep coming back. I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm sort of curious to hear what I say here. Like if I'm in a meeting or if I'm doing something AA related, especially if it involves other people, because probably the one thing I do the most regularly AA related would be like the morning quiet time type of thing, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that, it's totally good. But like sitting here, or I have a couple sponsees, doing anything with them, I get very grateful for this life, getting in the day-to-day, going to my job every day and just doing whatever other stuff I do on a daily basis. It's easy for my mind to sort of like kind of forget or just get, you know what I mean? Like think that that's normal and forget that what the majority of society considers normal for a 46-year-old is totally not normal for me. So, I'm an alcoholic and a crack addict of the highest order. I finally got sober a little over 2 years ago, after knowing I absolutely needed to be sober and trying with all the effort I could muster for like the 20 years previous to that. If there was one thing that was for sure about me, it was I was always going to go back at some point. I remember the first drink that I took. It was when I was a junior in high school. I mean, I don't remember it like vividly, but I definitely remember. It was at night. It was outdoors, at like some park. It was with, friends from high school that I knew from being a student with them, and so there were people that I knew that already were, like drinkers, and it was my, introduction to what I considered at that time to be an absolute magic world of being drunk. Like I couldn't believe that feeling was available and that I did not know about it prior to that. My attitude towards alcohol from that point forward, and this was also my attitude towards all substances really, was I want to take as much of this as I can, as much as I possibly can, like always. I worshiped alcohol back in those days. And, and I still managed to, like prior to starting drinking, I was like 16 years old. So, like a bit of a late bloomer maybe in a room like this. I don't know. A lot of the rehabs I went to, that was super late, some of the stories. But prior to that, and even sort of after that, my childhood was well, you would call it good. I didn't really realize it. I do now looking back that I didn't realize I wasn't really so comfortable in my own skin until I felt how comfortable I could be in my own skin drunk, right? Like it seemed like I was comfortable until I was like, so fuck, this is comfortable. This is the best. And so then I realized that, okay, maybe I wasn't so comfortable before, And that's standard. I hear that I hear that in a lot of shares. I hear that I hear a lot of your stories. I read that in the big book with the stories in there. But without alcohol or even with it, like successful at that age. Like I was, you know, sort of like valedictorian level student, varsity sports player type of guy, tons of friends. And then, but I know from the way I drank at the beginning, you know, because real quick it was like, you know, drinking on the weekends. My house, my where I lived growing up was like the party house, so all the kids would come over. My dad was never there. Blacking out almost every time I drank, which would piss me off, you know, because I would get drinking, and then like the girls would be there, it'd be like a party, and then literally like 1 second later, like it was, I wouldn't fall asleep. It'd be like if I was here and we were all getting hammered, and like 70% of you were hot girls instead of you, and then I blink my eyes and you're all gone, and it's the next morning, right? That's how my blackouts would be. And I would call the same guy, my buddy, every like Saturday and Sunday morning to find out what happened, right? So I know from that how it started, and from how alcohol played a role at the end, that I'm an alcoholic even if I never did drugs. But what, you know, sort of made my life really crazy was the fact that I added drugs in, specifically crack. I started smoking crack without even knowing that there was such a thing. You can believe that. Like I had never heard of crack until I already was addicted to it. You know, you might wonder, how the hell is that possible? Well, somehow or another, I got interested in prostitutes. You know, outside issues. Hey, what's so funny? Nothing. You know, and I don't know why. You know, I always say this, but it's true. Like I'm not trying to for you to think I'm cool, but I didn't need. We're talking about when I'm like 18 years old in high school. Like I did not need to go buy a prostitute. My buddy always says rent. I didn't need to go rent a prostitute in order to get laid. Like I didn't. I mean, I would leave my girlfriend's house after just getting laid and then go. You know, I was just fascinated by that. And then if I was drunk, even more so. Amen. And so I grew up in Laverne, right next to Pomona, back in the '90s. It was like Holt Mission, all that.
Isn't how many guys know Holt?
Before, yeah, I know my audience here. Come on. And especially back in those days before like cell phones and everything was like, you know, advertised, right? On the streets. Shit, you know, like it still makes a little feeling inside of me thinking back to that.
Moving on.
But anyway, the reason I even bring any of that up is that's, you know, those girls were smoking crack, which I didn't know what that was. And they'd be like, here. And so at some point, like after I tried it a few times, a few occasions, like it hit me right, and I had like the classic stereotypical, you know, crackhead reaction, like, where can we get more of this? And then like the whole thing. And so my life just crumbled down to nothing pretty quick after that. And, you know, so by the age of like 25, I'm like already on like my 5th or 6th rehab. Now I'm going to like super long-term ones, getting a little bit of time sober, and then always going back. All like the potential and, you know, bright future that I might have had before. And like, you know, I don't know, some of you must know this, like you get those first 3-4 months sober and all that potential, right? That human potential, like that intellectual power. Back then I was like young and handsome, all that, like, you know, anything's possible, you know? And so like it'd be exciting until like the next, you know, bender. And so it was literally exactly like what the doctor's opinion said, you know, like the sense of ease and comfort that I would get from smoking crack with a hooker was not attainable in any other way. And so I would go through like the familiar stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, like resolved never to do it again. And then that cycle repeated itself over and over and over until instead of being 25, I was 44, right? So that's 2 years ago, and like maybe like 15 more programs. And like, I started coming to AA. I started with NA, but like NA and then turned into AA. like in the last 10 years, let's say 2014. So before that, I was trying all kinds of other ways. And you know, I'm a bright guy. Like I can read and I can come to your meetings, and you know, you come to a few meetings, you figure it out. You figure out like what, you know, what it is. And I can read you this. I can recite you the steps. In fact, I was probably, you know, towards the top of like the, you know, the rankings as far as like being able to explain the program, right?
Genius.
Yeah, especially if you were like fucking it up. Like if you, with your like 15 years and your good reputation, were like saying something that I thought was like incorrect, I'd be quick, you know, to point that out because I hated myself, and so I wanted to feel smart. You know, and so like everybody would like me. I'd go to meetings, and I had all my friends now are part of the fellowship and stuff, and they would be dumbfounded, like what the hell, you know. It's just the same thing. And so I started to think that, like, I would never get sober, you know. I think, really, what I think it was, even though I've been going to meetings for the last 10 years, in between benders, right? So, like, literally, like, if I was on one, it would be maybe like 4 to 6 weeks of just like sort of like amazing that, I mean, I believe in God. I believe what people were saying about this being a God-given program and divine intervention, whatever you want to say. And I know that I can think back to instances when I was in places where I was so not safe physically. I was like, you know, on one, no defense, South Central LA, Skid Row, like just you name it, like up for days, just a mark, like a target. Like, how did they not just take care of me? So I know that God's hand was on me, you know, especially at certain times. I didn't really understand the first step. I didn't really have a real first step experience, you know. So part of all those, you know, I got 90 days again, you know, I'm back to work and I'm doing good, and, you know, everything looks good. I'm sleeping like once every 24 hours again, you know, like through the night and stuff. It was all like, what can I do? How can I do this? I didn't really understand. So one of my favorite portions, maybe sentences of the book would be, we read it in the chapter 3 reading. I can't even remember it verbatim right now. See how I used to, back in the day when I was still, you know, still not recovered, I would be able to tell you this. But now, we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were real alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. I like that. But for me, that's the first step more than whatever the first step is on the list. I had to fully concede to my innermost self that I was a real alcoholic. And there's like a lot of adjectives there. Like, if I'm already fully conceding, why does it need to be my innermost self? You know, like I see the book going out of its way to tell me that this has to be like all the way to my core. Like, I have to realize that I am a real alcoholic. And what is a real alcoholic? Well, in another part of the book, it tells me what that is, right? The physical part, like, that's easy. Yeah, I know that when I take one, you know, I don't know what year it'll be when I stop, if I ever do. But the part that I have a broken brain, right? Like, I have something wrong with my brain that'll always lead me back to the first drink, always, no matter what, you know. The no matter what club for me is that my broken brain will drink again, no matter what. Unless God does something miraculous inside of me to change the way my brain works. And that is what I have experienced here through this program, through the steps, through hanging out with you guys. I feel very strongly and confident in saying that God has changed me. And what like sort of started that off this time around, there was like really nothing to predict that like rehab number 23, March of 2022 would be like the time. Other than possibly the fact that I was so close to dying and I was welcoming the idea of dying. Like, I wanted to die, right? But I didn't have the balls to kill myself, or thank God I didn't have whatever, that's probably not accurate to say. I wasn't gonna kill myself. But to take drugs and die or to get shot, would have been fine. I remember being with this one, South Central girl for a few days, like a couple years before I got sober, and like literally telling her like, look, I got like $1,000 in my checking account. Here's my PIN number. Like, just make it so I don't know it's coming. Like shoot me in the back of the head, basically. And she got pissed. So I told her that. That's where I was at. Like that's where it was, because if I'm never gonna be able to get sober. Like the only thing worse than dying is staying alive and being in this life, And finally, when I got sober, I remember the feeling was like the knowledge that's the only thing that it would ever be for me was so complete, so thorough that I just kind of like didn't care anymore. Like the way I describe it, what I've described it ever since was like there's nothing left to hold on to, like getting a job, I somehow had a job, keeping my job, getting the girl, like all that shit, that we talk about that I, over the years previous would be very important to me. Didn't care about any of that. Surrender happened to me, and I still wanted to keep going. I still wanted to drink and use, and I even shared at a meeting at a Burning Desire, like I'm going to get high tonight. And the next morning I woke up and that was gone, and I was in a very neutral place. Whatever was going to happen with me was going to happen, but I had nothing left to hold on to, and I was, without really knowing that's what I was doing, I had fully conceded to my innermost self that I was a real alcoholic and crackhead, hooker, fucker, and all that stuff. And it started from there. And went from that position, and I'm out of time. Yeah, I got 52 seconds left. From that position, to go to a meeting every night, and go to I was in another outpatient, to just do that, and to have like no money and no car, no nothing, and walk to the closest meeting and like get a sponsor. Like the next time, to do all that stuff was like no problem, because why not? I had nothing going, right? But I was okay with it. Like in that period of time, I remember it back to it fondly. Nothing going, nowhere to be, couldn't afford, double cheeseburger, and that was great. And so I didn't, like a lot of this stuff happened, and I could see it looking back. Like surrender happened, I could see it looking back. Step 2, step 3, then especially steps 4 through 9, I see now are like have been able to maintain me to keep this life going. And to finish off, I'll say that I recently read this book about like the history of the Big Book, which is super cool. And what those dudes were doing and probably what makes me feel the best is getting the chance to work with you guys, getting the chance to like take a guy through the steps, like the way my sponsor took me through the steps, is probably the most rewarding. And it strikes me that in the beginning of AA, those guys that could never get sober, like those guys were never ever going to get sober. Like that's all they were doing. Before they even had steps, they were just looking for like the next drunk, like hopeless dude to take through. So anyway, hopefully I've said something that resonated. Thank you guys for listening. Thanks for letting me share.